Welcome, everybody. It is delightful to see you this Tuesday in September, now in the month of Elul, hurtling maybe, headlong toward Rosh Hashanah for our Siyyum on Tractate Avodah Zarah. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. I edit My Jewish Learning and A Daily Dose of Talmud, and I have the distinct privilege of getting to host these Siyyumim with all of you to celebrate the end of a tractate. And it feels like it's been a while since we've been together for one of these. But believe it or not, we're actually going to sneak another one in 2 weeks because the next tractate, Horayot, is so quick. But we're here today to celebrate Tractate Avodah Zarah, a really unique tractate because it's all about the avoidance of idol worship, which means that this is the one tractate that is utterly focused on our interactions and relations with non-Jews. This makes it feel relevant and also, frankly, complicated for us in the modern period. So I realize that not all of our audience is American. That's one of the things I love about doing this, but a lot of us are. So I wanted to say this that's been in my mind as we do this tractate. I tend to think that America in the late 20th and early 21st centuries arguably represents a high point in Jewish relationships with the non-Jewish world. And even if we aren't at the tip of that high point at this particular moment, most of us on the call have lived through some of those highs. And for me, at least, that makes this tractate, which is just rife with anxiety about and downright suspicion of non-Jews, especially kind of complicated, but also really relevant for us to wrestle with. So even if we aren't, for instance, worried about an animal being sold in the market this week, being offered to a foreign god next week, there are still things here that are very relevant to us. And as always, there have also been some really interesting stories and anecdotes to digest from these pages of the Talmud. So as we close the door on this tractate and turn into the next one, as always, we have three wonderful presenters here today to look back on some moments from the tractate. And so let me introduce them to you now. We have Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter.
Hey, everybody.
Rabbanit Fruchter is the founder and director of the South Philadelphia Shtiebel, and you can do Daf Yomi with her every day on her podcast, which is logically named Daf Yomi with Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. We're also joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg.
Hi, everybody. Mazal tov.
Rabbi Goldberg is an executive coach and consultant with more than 2 decades of experience in Jewish day schools and a lifetime of summers, including this past one at Ramah camps. And you can find him in your inbox pretty much every week through our series. And finally, we are joined by Dr. Sara Ronis.
Hi, everyone. Mazel tov, mazel tov.
Dr. Ronis is an associate professor of theology at St. Mary's University, where she teaches courses on Hebrew Bible and its interpretation, and is also a regular writer for this series. All three of them have prepared passages to look back on that are very boundary blurring. So that's going to be the theme of this Siyyum, and it's probably a good theme for this tractate. And as we turn to their presentations, I want to, hi Lily, Sarah's dog. I want to invite all of you to make copious use of our chat, which I will monitor as the presentations go on. I'd love to know where you're zooming in from today, but also things you're thinking about and things you're taking away from the tractate. And also if you have questions for the presenters about what they're presenting or comments, we love to weave those in as we go so that it is both a presentation and a conversation as we celebrate and wind down this tractate. So with all that said, let us start with Rabbi Goldberg, who's going to take us all the way back to Avodah Zarah 8.
All right. Hi, everybody. We're going to head back to the beginning of the Masechet, as Rachel said. Just a reminder, the very first Mishnah talks about not engaging in commerce with pagan neighbors so that you don't inadvertently add to their celebration, or some funds or objects that were once yours do not become objects used in idol worship. And it was that first topic of how we separate ourselves from our non-Jewish neighbors by staying away from them during their holidays. And we're going to focus on a text that talks about some of their holidays. So I'm going to share my screen right now. There we go. so you can see the text. Let me start the slideshow here. Oh, all right. So, oh, there we go. The Mishnah on page 8 lists. Oh, sorry. I just did something to my share. It went away. I'm sorry. Did it go away for you? Lost my slides. Pardon me, I'm having some technical. Am I sharing my screen?
We can see your text. Avodah
You can
Zarah
see
8,
my
and you've
text.
got the
Okay,
Mishnah up.
that's awesome. I cannot. There we go. I lost my text. I could see you for a moment, but now I can text. All right, I'm back. Thank you. Pardon me. Sorry about that. So the Mishnah, on 8a says, and these are the festivals of the Gentiles. It lists particular holidays that original Mishnah applies to. These are the days where 3 days before we can't engage in trade. And I want to highlight just two of them, Calenda and Saturnalia, which are actually listed in reverse order. Right, Saturnalia, it was a holiday that was celebrated mid-December. Some sources say probably around December 17th, but wasn't necessarily always in all of time going back a fixed date. It was a short festival that got lengthened over time. It was probably about a week by the time we got to the rabbi's era. And Calendra, in some ways, is similar to Rosh Chodesh, meaning it was a celebration for each new month in the Greek Roman calendar. But Calenda here is a celebration of New Year's, the January Rosh Chodesh, so to speak. Also a celebration of a number of days, including celebration, sacrifices, libations, all that stuff, games and other things. That's what Rav Hanan Bar Rava says in the Gemara. One of these festivals celebrated. Calenda is celebrated during the 8 days after the winter solstice, and Saturnalia is celebrated during the 8 days before the winter solstice. So we have these two holidays, one in mid-December leading up to the winter solstice, one beginning of January after the winter solstice, both regulars on the Roman calendar. These are some of the days where the trade that the first chapter talks about is barred. Then the rabbis tell the following story. The sages taught when Adam, the first person, saw that the days were progressively diminishing, Adam said, "Woe is me! Perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me and will ultimately return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder. This is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven." So some context to this story. The rabbis, on a number of occasions, imagine what it was like to be the first person created, plopped into the world, and what was the experience of the world like at the beginning. And according to one rabbinic tradition, the world was created on Rosh Hashanah, so Adam was created on the 6th day, and that would put creation in the fall. And the fall, of course, marks a time where we're losing daylight from day to day to day to day. And Adam, never having been in the world before, never having experienced the cycle of the world, sees each day is becoming progressively shorter and darker and colder, and thinks, oh my God, there's going to be more and more dark, more and more dark, more and more dark, and eventually I'm going to die from dark and cold. And that is the way of the world. So Adam arose and in response spent 8 days fasting and in prayer, a spiritual religious response. Once Adam saw that the season of Tevet, i.e. the winter solstice, had arrived and saw that the day was progressively lengthening after the solstice, Adam said, this is the order of the world, right? The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, passes, the days start getting longer, and Adam stops being nervous about the decrease in light and heat and sees that, oh, things are getting longer, I'm going to be okay. And in response to the growing light and warmth, Adam went and observed a festival for 8 days. And upon the next year, says the Talmud, Adam observed both these 8 days on which he had fasted in the previous year and these 8 days of celebration as days of festivities. So the rabbis say Adam established these two holidays, one right before the solstice, one right after the solstice. Each are 8 days, maybe a shout out to Hanukkah. That's a conversation for a different day. And what does the Talmud say about this? Adam established these festivals for the sake of heaven, but they established them for the sake of idol worship. It's an interesting note at the end there in this Mishnah, which and discussion afterwards about the holidays of the Romans, the holidays of the neighbors of the Jewish people. The rabbis come and tell this story and say, well, these holidays are actually holidays that are part of human history, going back right to the start. But their origins are not the origins of the stories that the Romans tell about where their holidays come from. You can do a lot of research online or other places about all the origin stories that Roman culture had for these holidays and how they're embedded in earlier holidays. But the rabbis in the Gemara says, actually, these are holidays set up by Adam HaRishon. The first person created these holidays, created them based on their experience the first year they were on the planet ever. And they were an appreciation of the cycles of nature and maybe appreciation for God for like putting in those cycles of nature. And they could have been these great holidays, but they, our neighbors, co-opted them and then changed them and made them for their own purposes, which are not sacred, which are not right. And that's maybe why we need to stay away from. It's an interesting sort of tale the rabbis tell to say, we're not them. They might be more populous and might, be stronger and might rule the Mediterranean world, but they got their stories and their holidays wrong, and we know their true origins and purposes. We got it right, say the rabbis. And that is the text I brought to share today, and we'll see how this blurring comparison plays out in two other settings, I think, from my colleagues coming next. So Rachel, your microphone is off.
Whoops. Thank you.
No
So Wayne Rosenfeld says when he was an undergrad at Alfred University, in his Latin class, they talked about the holiday Saturnalia. This is a known holiday from the Roman world. And they talked about celebrating it apparently outside in togas in the snow, and nobody was really up for it when push came to shove. So yes, Saturnalia at least was an independent holiday, which gets to our second question from from Mark. Does Kalenda exist only in the Talmud? Gosh, I am not versed in Roman holidays and pagan holidays. Does someone want to grab that?
I'm not an expert on that either, but it does not. It exists in ancient sources. If you give me a minute, or maybe when the next person's teaching, there's a great book about Jewish time that is on my table across the room. I could grab it if you want to look at like both Jewish and non-Jewish sources about it. One of my colleagues might be able to name it faster than I can grab it.
So calends, with an S, is the name in the Roman world for their Rosh Chodesh. So there's a calends every month, and it's the first day of the month, and that's where we get the English word calendar from.
Okay, Mark posted that as well. Thank you. All right, one more question. Rabbi Goldberg, you mentioned that this Mishnah comes on in the context of a discussion about not trading with Jews. I'm sorry, not trading with non-Jews ahead of their festivals, right? We don't sell them goats that we're worried will then, be sacrificed to foreign gods, things like that. So this is a modern halachic question for the group, because of course the Talmud isn't going to answer it. But what about 3 days before Ramadan, Christmas, Kwanzaa, Easter, other non-Jewish festivals? Is there an application of this rule for us today in the modern world?
Such a good question. And I wanted to direct you to the very first Tosfot, one of the commentaries on the Talmud, one of the very first of this tractate. This posed a big issue for Ashkenazim living in Christian society, really where the era of the Tosafists begins just right before the Crusades, right? So where many Jews were killed for not embracing Christianity. So how do the Tosfot deal with this question right at the beginning of Avodah Zarah that's like, don't do business with non-Jews? There's a real concern here that's described, and it's really important to know about this Tosfot, which rejects the notion that all non-Jews are idol worshippers. It's actually a crucial Tosfot for understanding relationships between Jews and non-Jews today. And one of their explanations is, nah, it's actually, we're not all, the world is not very religious today, and not everyone bows down to an idol all the time. And there's very little chance that someone is going to, because of a common business transaction, shake your hand and go bow down or sacrifice an animal. And that's one way that they get out of it. But also based on this Mishnah is one of the major views about the status of other world religions and if they fall into the category of Avodah Zarah at all, which the Meiri, who is a 13th century authority, says, no, Christianity does not fall into that category. It's just important to know about this kind of like survey based on this one little Mishnah at the beginning of Avodah Zarah. So I think the short answer to that question is no, it does not apply halachically today in that way.
Okay. Thank you very much. That'll be a relief to those who like to shop the last minute pre-Christmas sales or sell things to right before Christmas. Okay, we're going to go ahead on to our second presentation, but folks, please keep the comments and questions coming. And we are going to move next to Dr. Ronis.
All right. Hello, everyone. So Rabbi Goldberg's presentation looked at a text that really explicitly names and thinks about how to relate to an idolatrous world. So I want to bring a text that I actually think complements it really, really beautifully. So I'm going to also share my screen. I'm going to try. Okay, so I brought you the whole text, but we're only going to look at a tiny little piece. No need to click through, but if you want to or you want to blow it up, feel free. So we're in, I'm taking us to Avodah Zarah 29. And here we get a set of really sort of medical prescriptions on how to deal with various illnesses. And, there's a series of here, use these ingredients for this illness, use these ingredients for this illness. Are you seeing my screen? Perfect, thank you. And I want to just take us down to not what the ingredients are, but how they are prepared. So I love context, but we're only going to look at this piece. Rav Acha, son of Rava, pounded all of these ingredients together in a mortar and took 5 fingers full of it and drank it. Rav Ashi pounded each separately in a mortar and took from it the equivalent of his thumb and his pinky, right? So sort of this kind of move, and drank it. Rav Papa said, I did all of these, and I was not cured until a certain Tayya'a, a Tayya'a is a nomadic Arab of the Tayyi tribe, until a certain Tayya'a said to me, take a new pitcher, fill it with water, and place it under the stars overnight until morning, and then drop a spoonful of honey into it and then take it. I did so, and I was cured. Now, this is a fascinating little piece. What Rava says is wild. And until you had learned Avodah Zarah, you probably didn't realize it was wild. But one of the things that we've talked about extensively in the tractate is how dangerous it is to expose water overnight. Now, leaving water exposed overnight to the elements makes that water for the rabbis not appropriate to be consumed. And here you'll see literally the prescription is take the water, leave it overnight, and then add this honey. Now, some folks might be a little bit confused here because this is not the translation in the Steinsaltz. If you're following along in Sepharia, Sepharia fixes this translation because it knows this is weird. But this is actually a literal translation of the text, right? So in Avodah Zarah, we spend all this time talking about don't expose water overnight. Don't do it. Don't even think about it. And if you're worried that your water has been exposed, get rid of it. And then here we have a classic medical, the rabbis teaching us medicine and saying, you have to, right, in order for this to work, right, Rav Acha's and Rav Ashi's methods don't work for Rav Papa. The only thing that works is when he hears from this nomadic Arab to expose water overnight, then add the honey, and then take it, and you'll be cured. And says Rava, it works. Now, nothing here is explicitly about Avodah Zarah, right? There's nothing in this particular text that says, and this relates to idol worship in any way. But here's where looking at some really fun other texts might offer us some context. So 2,000 years earlier, we already have evidence of a belief that exposing waters overnight, this is called astral medicine or astral magic, has particular powers in curing people. So one medical prescription says if a man's left temple hurts him and his left eye is swollen and tears, you crush dates, Talmud dates, the asi plant, and cedar resin in myrrh oil. You expose it overnight to the stars, and in the morning, without eating, you daub his eyes with it. And one medical prescription makes this even clearer, right? How does this actually work, right? How does it work that exposing medicine overnight actually works? So one text tells us, at night you let it stand overnight before the goat star. The goat star was associated with the goddess Gula, who was a goddess of healing. You draw a magic circle around it with flour, you sense it, and you invoke the names of Gula and Belet Eli. So exposing this medicine overnight invokes the power of the goddess of healing, who is associated with a star. Now, we might say on a practical level, right, exposing medicine overnight can also do two things, right? It could steep whatever herbs are, so they have steeped for longer, and it also keeps them at room temperature. So there might actually be real medical benefits to exposing water overnight. But what I wanted to sort of highlight for us is the ways that, one of the things that you've read over and over again in the daily essays is how Tractate Avodah Zarah is all about blurring boundaries. And what we actually see here is we see some of those boundaries being blurred in these really explicit ways where they talk about how do we work with non-Jews, how do we not work with non-Jews, how do we work with different kinds of Jews. But we also see some of that boundary blurring is actually so subtle that we don't even realize that it's happening. In fact, the rabbis might not realize it's happening, right? They don't say, this is a 2,000-year-old medical prescription from ancient Assyria. They say, a wandering nomadic Arab told me how to do this. And so even when we think we have a handle on how blurred our boundaries can be between Jews and non-Jews in this text, I think that the more we learn and the deeper we learn, we're going to continue to be surprised by just the depth of the messiness of the world that the rabbis lived in, and how they make it work for them in ways that are really interesting.
Thank you so much. We can take some questions if folks want to put their hands up. Not so many comments on this, but we're running uncharacteristically ahead of schedule this morning, afternoon. So I just wanted to invite folks if they have questions or thoughts that they wanted to share. I will also take them by hands up, and I'm happy to do that. In the meantime, let's go ahead to our third presentation. So Rabbanit Fruchter, another blurring.
Amazing. I don't know. This is like really cool that the two of you just brought such cool expertise into the room around these practices, which I kind of looked at with glazed eyes as we learned through. I'm like, So thank you so much for deepening my understanding. So I wanted to talk about, we're just like making our way through the Masechta. I wanted to talk about Daf Mem Gimel 43. And an image that, no pun intended, pun very much intended around the word image, that really stuck with me. The Mishnah there describes Rabban Gamliel, the great Nasi, who had pictures or forms, actually, of the moon on a tablet on the wall. And he would ask witnesses about the new moon, which forms what they saw. So he tried to get them to report on the new moon using these forms of a moon. And so the Gemara asks, wait a minute, you can't do that. It says in the pasuk, in the verse, lo tasuniti, don't make things in the form of things that serve me. You're not allowed to craft things in this world that look like things who serve me. Now, what serves God? All the celestial bodies, right? What else serves God? It's so interesting. This also came up on this page. The Beit HaMikdash, the temple. There was this whole discussion about like if you're even allowed to make a replica of any of the parts of the temple. So how could Rabban Gamliel have done this? Now, I feel pretty precious about this because one of my favorite Jewish rituals ever is called Kiddush Levana. It's when you go out in the first half of the month on a Saturday night and look at the new moon and you say, "Blessed are you, God, the one who renews the months." The God who made this moon empty is going to make it full again. And when we did it this last Saturday night, someone from the shtibel tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Really? Avodah Zarah." Really, you're going to go out and howl at the moon? That's idol worship, right? And it's actually fascinating because the end of that ritual, we do Aleinu. We say, God is king. Even though we're going out and praising the moon, God is actually king. But I think what this story of Rabban Gamliel and our current ritual of Kiddush Levana really tells us is that there is a blurry line between serving God's world and serving God through God's world, right? Like there's this way in which we're supposed to go out into the world and see these amazing things and not bow down to them, but say, oh my gosh, ma rabu ma'aseh Hashem, how incredible is God's world? And so this question for Rabban Gamliel, we're like, how could you make a statue? How could you make a form of the moon? It's bowing down to it. And the whole page explores like why that was okay, right? My favorite answer is you're allowed to learn about something forbidden by doing it, right? So you're allowed to learn and teach by creating something that you weren't allowed to create in the first place. And that's how Rabban Gamliel was a teacher and a learner. He had to understand it. That's also Dr. Ronis. I'm sure you think about this in the context of magic as well. That's sorcery. You're allowed to learn it in order to understand what is forbidden about it. Another fascinating answer that's brought by the Gemara is, oh, a non-Jew made it for him. And I read that and I'm like, what? Is there like a local non-Jewish moon sculpture manufacturer who's now creating products for the Jewish community? And I guess I wonder if any of the learners in this room noticed that at any point throughout the tractate, that sometimes we actually see, like a couple of weeks ago, we saw the non-Jew who grabbed the leaking barrel of wine and hugged it close so that the Jewish person's wine wouldn't drip out, or someone would watch the wine for a Jew. And you see these antagonistic relationships, but you also see like people in commerce with each other, sharing meals with, of course, this need to create boundaries around it. But there's actually not this clear animosity that exists necessarily between Jews and non-Jews throughout the whole tractate. And in fact, in this story with Rabban Gamliel, one is even like, hey, I'll make a moon sculpture for this incredible leader of the Jewish people. So some takeaways to think about from this story of Rabban Gamliel. First of all, it's one of the major sources for what we do and on a legal level with making images of the celestial bodies and even any of the horoscopes too. Like we have those questions too about other kinds of images, and that's brought forth all the way through to the Code of Jewish Law from this particular piece of Talmud. And so there is a location to think about. But I also want to just invite us all to consider the Mishnah. There is a teaching in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, where if one stops while they are learning to look at a beautiful tree and says, "Oh, this tree is so beautiful," it says in the Mishnah that that person should be liable for their life. And we're like, what are you talking about? Trees are awesome, right? That's not the thing. The thing is, if you leave your world of God, if you leave the world of Torah to say, oh, here's something outside of God and Torah, this tree, this moon, this sun, this Mercury, whatever it is, that's the problem. But if we can go ahead and look at God's world and make it all make sense under the realm of our covenant, then that's a beautiful thing, actually, say the commentaries on that Mishnah. So I hope that we leave this tractate not with like a desire to spit on the moon, right? That's not the thing. The thing is, we're just being asked to have a little bit more responsibility around how we relate to these things, not to just wink at them and say, if I just wave, everything will be fine, but to say that I am part of a covenant in God's world, and it is quite beautiful, from the forms of the moon to the structure of the Beit HaMikdash and beyond.
Thank you so much. All right, let me open up the floor for a little bit to see if folks have comments or questions on this tractate. What are you taking away? Claudette, go ahead.
Thank you. Before I address something that Professor Sara talked about, I would like to say, like most of us on this tractate, was very uncomfortable. I was very uncomfortable going through it, doing it, and everything. But you touched on something that I would like to talk about, modern day science. You said that when they put the water outside and then they drank it, they got cured. I used to hear that from my grandparents, those type of things, right? But as you know, today, a neurologist will tell you that there is a placebo medicine. Somebody who is ill, they give them a fake pill, and the person gets cured, even though they didn't have the real medicine. So I would think that maybe when they were putting this water outside and they got cured, they were thinking about being healed, and it meant the brain worked for it. Put aside, we know that Hashem is working in the brain, so we know that, right? So I had to bring the whole thing, when I was looking at that, into modern day thinking of exactly what was happening. I don't know if the Professor Sara can address that.
Yes, absolutely. I think the placebo effect is real. You're absolutely right. But I mean, what's particularly cool in the Reiner book, so in the PowerPoint, in the handout that I shared, the bottom was a book recommendation. She points out that it might actually have real effects on the material. Because if you leave herbs to steep for 24 hours or for 12 hours, the medicine is actually going to be stronger. So
Right.
I completely agree with you, Claudette. Part of this is likely, right, part of medicine in general is the placebo effect. We know that even today. And it is also possible that some of these medicines were better once they had been left out overnight. And so this might be trial and error, right? Their own experimentation, that they noticed that people were healed better or faster if this was left out overnight. So you're absolutely right. There are many ways to understand what is happening. And I think we also should note that sometimes it probably didn't work.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Hesh, you're up next.
Thanks, Rachel. The interesting thing about the blurring here is that it speaks not only to an external, but it speaks to the internal. So that the imagery of stopping one's prayers to see a beautiful tree can also be related internally to how we deal with the hakafa in the reading of Torah each Shabbat. When we go around with the Torah and people kiss the Torah, what's the motivation behind kissing the Torah? Are they kissing an object or are they affirming the sacred text? And that is, and that's to me is the internal Avodah Zarah. I mean, if a person is kissing it as a physical object, as opposed to the message that the Torah conveys, then haven't we blurred the lines?
Rabbi Summer, I didn't parse your name correctly until your face came on the screen, but folks should know I taught in your Hebrew school 25 years ago, which was not your question when I was an undergrad. But yeah, when you were a rabbi at Temple Beth Tikva in Madison a million years ago.
Rachel, Rachel, you're one of the reasons why I come on to each of these, because it gives me a chance to reconnect with you and the wonderful continued teaching that you are doing.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you. And now I'm all distracted and forgot what your question is. Did one of our panelists catch it?
Well, the question is how we deal with the potential, always the potential for the internal Avodah Zarah, the transforming of even our daily worship into its unintended purpose or an unintended purpose.
I feel like that's a rabbi question. One of the rabbis want to grab that?
Better question than there is an answer, I feel like. But Rabbi Goldberg, go for it.
Well, what I heard in that, I thought it was a wise comment and it elevates our conversation. What we talked about were things that the rabbis saw in the society in which they lived that were external, and whether they co-opted them or not, or how we dealt with them. I think what you're raising is, let's look at the things in our own practice that might actually have elements of Avodah Zarah in it, but we do them regularly, right? Treating the Torah like an object of worship has Avodah Zarah-esque tendencies. Mm-hmm. The question is, what's your internal intention when you kiss the Torah? Or should you not kiss the Torah and still you just stand for it out of respect? Are there different ways we might do that? And I think there are lots of things in Judaism that have crept in at one time or another that have origins in all sorts of other cultures. And there are lots of things we do in our own observance that might, if taken with a historical eye or a little, digging into where does this actually come from, be things that, although we treasure today, this Masachet might not approve of in its purest form, but somehow we've taken them on and moved them to a way that's meaningful for us. I think that's important for us to note. No tradition is completely pure in that sort of way. And, kissing the Torah is a great example of that. So now hold that thought, and when you go to synagogue next and the Torah walks by, have that conversation with yourself. What do you mean when you're reaching out to kiss the Torah? How does it fit into your spirituality, and how do you make of it in terms of this? I think it was a great comment. Thanks for it.
Thank you.
I remember having friends who would joke that waving lulav and etrog feels like just about the most pagan thing ever. And yet we do it on Sukkot.
I mean, I kind of want to almost push Hesh your question even further, right? Which is because Avodah Zarah, part of Avodah Zarah is doing things that are worshiping of other gods, right? Or that have a root in worshiping of other gods. But part of them is also, right, like elevating something, a system of values, a system of belief beyond or above the system of belief laid out by the rabbis. And that, we can talk about the things that happen in synagogue, but I also think we might talk about what are the broader values or figures that we place above monotheism, that we place above an understanding of God. In a capitalist society, is a worship of money idolatry? Is the worship or respect for a particular political leader something that goes above our love for and reverence for God? And so the question about internal Avodah Zarah, I think, is a really powerful one that I really wrestle with all the time. So I just want to echo that question has all kinds of implications that we should all be thinking about all the time.
All
Thank you.
right, we're gonna
Thank you.
thank you. We're gonna go to Friedel next,
Hi,
taking the
thank you very
questions in
much.
the order they came.
I have a comment and a question. The reason I have been studying daily Talmud is because I wanted to find out exactly how we dealt with leaving the land. We knew how to act in the land. Now we have no temple. Now we have no sacrifices that we can make in the temple. And the question becomes, how do we as individuals connect with God and connect with the community? I found each of these machzechot to be very interesting, but sometimes, as everyone has noted, they clash with each other in basic ideas. I think most of us here in the room are probably people who live in the diaspora rather than in Eretz Yisrael. And we continue to have to answer these questions for ourselves. How do we behave as a minority in a majority different culture? And it's the Talmud has lots of answers to these questions, but Avodah Zarah, this particular Masechet, seems to underline that lots of people trip up. The funny story in the last page of the men who were eating fruit with the king, and the king was respectful of kashrut for one man and not for the other. It was a really funny story, but what it begged me to ask is, are both men Jews in our eyes? The question becomes, a man who made a mistake the night before or shouldn't have done that, and the man who behaved himself. We are such we are such a diverse group of one community. I want to ask the speakers whether they feel their living in a diverse community is clarified in reading Avodah Zarah or confused. Was it a bad question?
Everybody, everyone needs a minute of think time. The Slack presentation does, sorry, not Slack, Zoom presentation doesn't, we like to keep it rolling, but people do need a minute to pause and think. So your question is, does this clarify how we should live in a world where not everybody's Jewish, and even if there are many Jews in our community, not everybody has the same level of commitment to God and Torah, right? That's the question.
Yes, yes.
Folks can answer that in the chat too, if that
Sure.
changed your thinking about living in that world. I will say, for myself, I've been doing some research into anti-Semitism recently, and one of the questions that comes out of thinking about that is why? Like, why is anti-Semitism a thing? Why is hatred of Jews a thing? And the answer that's most powerful to me is this sort of stubborn insistence on a certain kind of monotheism that is really just a challenge and an affront sometimes to our neighbors that creates a certain amount of tension. I don't know if that's the right answer, but that is one that sticks with me. But let's hear from our panelists, if anyone wants to jump in on this question.
I don't think for me that it doesn't help me better understand my world, I think, but it really does help me better understand the rabbi's world. And the rabbis, right? And recognize that the
Spoken like
questions,
a scholar.
well, no, but that the questions that we have today look, we all know there are times you read the Talmud and you're like, okay, that is a problem they had 2,000 years ago that I do not have today, right? This is not one of those cases. This is a place where I'm like, oh, the rabbis are facing something that I also have faced, and it allows me to recognize their humanity and the kinds of intellectual integrity that they're practicing in trying to figure this out in ways that are rooted in their own world and in Torah.
I just want to build on that. I think it's a rich question with so many elements of it. The piece I'd like to comment on is about, it goes back to one question you said, the Talmud deals with how to live outside the land and to live in different places. I think also this Masechet and our study of it is about how to live with different sorts of populations. And I know as a writer about this Masechet, I struggled with this, like how do I, in English, voice, right, the word goy, right, the non-Jew, or Steinsaltz, the English says Gentile. Sometimes it means a pagan, right? Our first question today, or one earlier, we talked about like, right, are all our non-Jewish neighbors idolaters or just some of them? And what's the definition? How? And I know on the Hebrew text, right, we say there's, right, Avodah Zarah, someone who does foreign worship. Sometimes there are manuscripts that talk about Avodat Kochavim Mazalot, star worshipers, right? Worshiping celestial bodies instead of, God. And there's a definitional question about like which neighbors are other, so that they're apart and separate, and which neighbors have a different religion but aren't foreign in the ways that this Masechet is talking about, right? Who are we traveling the same path with, just from a different spiritual or religious tradition, and who's really other? That goes to like, can you, shop in December in North America, or not? Who do we put in these categories? And it's another place where I don't have an answer yet. I want to come. This is one of these Masechta when we read the Hadran, I'm like, oh, I have to come back to this and study it more deeply, because I think there's so much here, and I want to take in more. But I guess what I'm saying with this is looking at who our neighbors are and which ones fit these categories deserves more thought too.
Absolutely.
Right, we're gonna, oh, sorry, go ahead. Continue on. All right, Rob, let's grab your question, then I will probably have to close down the Q&A to get us finished within the hour.
So something I've heard from a lot of students in this class and other classes where I studied Daf Yomi is a general discomfort with the entire tractate, because it identifies the others, the people that are not Jewish, and in a derogatory way. They can't touch our food, they can't touch our wine, they can't even look at our wine. And it's a commandment that we're supposed to use funny names to make fun of their gods, these kinds of things. And all these things are very disturbing to modern day thinking. It reminds us of times back in the Jim Crow South, where people had their own water fountains and their own bathrooms and lunch counters. This separation between people, it's very disturbing. That was a horrible time in U.S. history, and we're very glad that we got rid of it. Yet still, we read this tractate, and it reminds us of separations between people. The big concern is intermarriage, which causes challenges in relationships and in creating Jewish homes and raising Jewish children. So this tractate's necessary. We need to be aware that there are separations, though, in order for the continuation of the Jewish people. To preventing intermarriage is really the focus of what this is all about. We need to find the balance between separating and integrating. I remember there was a magazine article that was published in 1964 in Look magazine, L-O-O-K magazine. It was a popular magazine, and the article in 1964 predicted that by the year 2000 there would be no more Jews. This was back when people made predictions about the year 2000 all the time, and they said that the reason there would be no more Jews was because of intermarriage and assimilation. Well, meanwhile, it's the year 5785. There's more Jews, a lot more Jews now than there were in 1964, and Look magazine is out of business. So we're doing something right in finding this balance between living in an accepting society where we're tolerant of others, but also keeping this separation between us so that we can continue to exist as a Jewish people.
I think that's a great comment to head into our closing on. So being respectful of folks' schedules, I want to go ahead and then turn to the final lines of this tractate so we can put it to rest, not forever, because we always say that we are going to return to it. That's how we close out tractates. So Dr. Ronis, why don't you steer us through the last little bit of Avodah Zarah so we can close it out together for now. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Wonderful. Yep.
There we
Yep.
go.
And this actually relates to questions around intimate relations between Jews and non-Jews. Most tractates end with something inspiring. I'm going to be honest with you, this one was more kind of funny to me, but really highlights how these things get fuzzy. Ki hadamar Yehuda uvati Bartovi habuyatve kame de Shabur Malka. So it's like this incident that happened where Mar Yehuda and Bati Bartuvi are sitting in front of King Shapur, the great and glorious emperor of the Sasanian Empire. Aito lekaimaihu etroga, psak achal, psak vehavle lebati Bartove, hadar data asara zimne ba'ara, psak havle lemar Yehuda. So the king cuts a slice of so that the king's servants bring an etrog to them. The king cuts a slice and eats it. I don't know, someone growing up with Sukkot, the idea of cutting into an etrog like just gives me anxiety, but it was also a dessert fruit. So unrelated to Sukkot, they cut open this etrog and he cuts a slice for himself, and then he cuts a slice and he gives it to Bati Bartuvi. And then he stabs the knife into the ground 10 times. As we concluded on this daf, we're talking about how to transition a knife from non-Jews to Jews. He sticks it 10 times in the ground, cut the slice, and gives it to Mar Yehuda. Right. So if he says, "Oh, Mar Yehuda, he is Jewish. I'm going to make sure to transition it appropriately." Bati Bartuvi, he just gives him the food. Amar le Bati Bartovi. Vahu Gavra Lav Bar Yisraelhu. Right, Bati Bartovi says to him, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, dude, I'm also Jewish. What are you doing?" Amar le Mar Kimli Begave, Umar La Kimli Begave. King Shapur says to him, "Listen, that guy, I know he's Jewish. You, I'm not so sure." And then to put the point on even finer, the Talmud ends with a different account of what King Shapur said. Ika de Amri, right? And some say that he actually said, "Amar le Itkar, my avid beorta," right? I know, right? We know what you did last night. You're going to tell me you're Jewish after whatever it was that you did last night? I don't think so. So that, right, that is how this Masechet ends, with a reminder that the boundaries are not just about, what we might think of as ethnic identity, but they're also about behavior. That to be Jewish is not only about, and sometimes not ever about, being born to Jewish parents. There are lots of ways to become Jewish, and that what matters is, right, that we live a Jewish life that is visible to those around us. And with that, Hadran Allah Hasocher et Hapoel Uslika la Masechet Avodah Zarah.
All right, let's say the final words then. Let's go out to the Hadran. Rabbanit Fruchter, you're gonna start us off with that.
Wonderful. And those of you who are completing Masechet Avodah Zarah, Mazal Tov, and feel free while you're on mute to just join along with me. So you are saying the Hadran as well. Hadran alach Masechet Avodah Zarah, v'hadrach halan, edatan alach Masechet Avodah Zarah, v'datach halan, lo nidnishim minach Masechet Avodah Zarah, v'lo tidnishim minan, lo ba'alma hadain, v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yihi ratzon l'fanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, shetehei Toratcha u'manotenu ba'olam hazeh, u'tehei imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achi bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Harevna Adonai Eloheinu, please make it sweet, our God, at Divrei Toratcha b'finu b'fifios amcha be'Yisrael, the words of your Torah in our mouths and in the mouths of all of Beit Yisrael. V'niyah nachnu kulanu v'tzatzenu v'tzatzei amcha be'Yisrael, kulani yodei shemecha v'lamdei Toratecha, me'oivai techakmenu mitzvotecha, ki li'olam hi li. Yehi libi tamim b'chukecha, lema'an lo evosh le'olam, lo eshkach pikudecha, ki bamchi tani, baruch ata Adonai, lamdeni chukecha. Amen, 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 Salah va'ed. Modim anachnu lefanecha. We're thankful before you, God. Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, shesamta chalkenu miyoshvei Beit HaMedrash, that you gave us the opportunity to be sitting here learning Torah. V'lo samta chalkenu miyoshvei kranot, she'anu mashkimim v'hem mashkimim. Anu mashkimim l'divrei Torah, v'hem mashkimim l'dvarim b'telem. Anu amelim v'hem amelim. Anu amelim makablim schar, v'hem amelim v'eina makablim schar. Anu ratzim v'hem ratzim. Anu ratzim l'chayei olam haba, v'hem ratzim l've'er shachat. Shene'amar b'ata Elohim toridem l've'er shachat. Anshe dami mumirma lo yachatu yomehem v'ani evtach bach. Next page. Yehi ratzon l'fanecha Adonai Elohai, kashem she'azartani l'sayim masechet avodah zarah, kain ta'azreni la'atchil masechtot usfarim acherim u'l'saymam. Give us the strength to begin a new masechta and to complete it as well. Lilmod l'olami, to learn it and to teach it. Lishmor v'lasot u'l'kayim, to keep it, to do and to uphold. Et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha ba'ava, all the words of your Torah in love. U'schut kol atanaim v'amoraim, talmidei chachamim yamod li l'zari lanu l'zarenu shalot Musha Torah mipi umipi zari or zari adolam v'yitkayem bi b'hitalechecha tancha utach b'shachbecha tishmor alecha v'akitosa hitesichecha ki v'yirbu yamecha v'yosifu l'cha shnos chaim orach yamim b'yimina b'smola osher v'chavod Adonai oz la'amo yitain Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. Kaddish.
Just want to note, as we say the Kaddish, the opening paragraph has a phrase to rid alien worship from the land. It's maybe an appropriate, we say it for every Masechet at a Siyyum, but there's some echoes of this Masechet, particularly in the language of so it's coming. Vikada vikada shemei rabbah, v'yamad hu atid litchadata u'lachaya mataya lasakna yetahon l'chayei alma Lemivne karta Jerusalem, ulesachlala hechala begava, lemeakar pulchana nochria meara, ulavata pulchana deshamaya laatre, v'yamlich chucha brichu b'malchute v'karei b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechobe Yisrael, bagala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam amen umaya, v'yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'tomam v'naseh, Vitadar vitala vitala shmei kucha brichu le'ela min kol b'chata b'shirata tushbachata b'nechamata tamran be'alma b'imru amen. Al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidei Hon ve'al kol Talmidei Hon ve'al kol man de'oskim be'oraita diva Torah dein v'diva chol atar ve'atar yehei lahon ulchon shlam araba achina v'chista b'rachamei b'chayei arichei muzonei v'vichei u'furkana mikadav avuhon divishmaya b'imru amen. Yehei shlam arava min shamaya v'chaim tovim aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav hu yaseh b'rachamav shalom aleinu v'kol Yisrael v'kol Yoshrei Teva.
Amen. All right, Mazel Tov, everybody. I will not wish you Shana Tova just yet because I'm hoping that you will join us in exactly 2 weeks to complete Tractate Horayot. At that point, we'll still be about a week out from Rosh Hashanah. And while you're planning your Jewish learning calendar, I also want to invite you, if you're not already, to join Off the Daf, our Talmud book club. There are many things we can learn in this format, but there are some things you can learn by spending extended time with an author and with a book about Talmud. So we've been doing this this calendar year. It's a new program, and the next installment we have put after all of the fall chagim, but that doesn't mean you might not want to start on the book now. So I will invite you all to pick up a copy of Barry Holtz's Rabbi Akiva, Sage of the Talmud. That is our next selection. And hopefully we will see you in October on the 21st for that program. It's a bit of a ways away, but I wanted to mention it. Thank you to all of our panelists for your thoughtful presentations and answers to audience questions. Thank you to all of you who participated in this, all of you in this program who asked really good questions, made really good comments, and create just a really lovely learning community through Zoom for us. I always feel so privileged to be a part of this. And we will then see you in your inbox for Horayot page 2, because there's never page 1, tomorrow morning. And on Thursday for review of the daf of the week. We'll get a glimpse at the beginning of Horayot, and we'll see you hopefully in 2 weeks for Siyyum, and hopefully on the other side of the Chagim to discuss Barry Holtz's book. So lots of wonderful learning coming up. Lovely to see you all. Wishing you all a good afternoon and an early Shabbat Shalom, because it's only Tuesday. Okay, bye everyone.